After an absolutely ridiculous week of Overwatch, we're ready to dive back into another week's preview. Lots of ridiculous stuff went down, leading to even more confusion than actual answers. And with a 20-game week ahead of us, we're bound to run into even more chaos. Just to add on to the excitement factor, this is the last week before the start of the Kickoff Clash tournament, meaning there's a tournament picture to be keeping in mind as this week goes on. Lots of spots are up for grabs, anything can happen. So how about we get right into this, There's a lot to talk about. It's an early start this week in APAC starting on Thursday. The first game of many will be a showdown between the Philly Fusion and the Seoul Dynasty, which I'm actually going to be considering the first key match of the week. I find this one important for a few reasons. For one, both of these teams could genuinely match up well. 2, I'd like to see if Philly can keep up their high level of play. And 3, I'm curious to see how Seoul progresses after a wildly inconsistent week. Generally speaking, the Fusion are going to be the favorites in most people's eyes. Regardless of how the two rosters match up, the Fusion had the way cleaner opening week. Nobody's going to deny that. Their DPS in particular made a huge splash, and if they can hold their own against the likes of Fleta and Lip, surely they could do the same against Prophet and Fitz. Their strong start has me thinking that the Fusion have it in them to pull this off. The only question is, do they win? Well, believe it or not, I'm going to say no. Despite the fact that Philly looked very strong early on, I believe the Dynasty still have a better idea of how to approach the game, especially after learning as much as they did during opening week, hopefully. Maybe I'm being a weirdo here, seeing as Philly clearly had the better week, but I'm going with a 3-2 in favor of the Dynasty. Regardless of how much he plays, teams with Carpe on them often seem to struggle against Prophet-led teams. And after getting embarrassed during the play-ins last year, I'm convinced that Prophet and Fitz are about to serve up a revenge match. I also generally feel better about the Dynasty support line in this matchup, so collectively Seoul's unit feels a bit stronger. So long as they play their comfort picks and maybe don't go overboard with ridiculous things like Sombra, this should be a winnable game for the Dynasty. Next we have the Chengdu Hunters versus the Hangzhou Spark. These two Chinese rivals are trending in different directions. Chengdu showed some inconsistency, while the Spark retained a somewhat solid week. Chengdu are always a difficult team to get a grasp on, but I think that last week showed us that at least right now, in the current meta, they're having some problems. Without Yveltal to play Brig and a third DPS option, the Hunters seem to be struggling in specific scenarios. Something doesn't feel quite right. We saw it in the Seoul game. Maybe it was the lack of Wrecking Ball or like Pharah, I don't really know. Meanwhile, the Spark, while inconsistent at times, did seem to embrace that APAC playstyle a lot better. APAC really seems to like Hitscan and Brig and Echo and Reaper, and that heavily favors the Spark due to the simple fact that their roster is more flexible and this just plays more up to their comfort zone. Leave is an absolute flex god, but he can only do so much on his own. What can he really do if Jinmu is forced into playing Soldier or Echo again? It's out of his realm of comfort. Alpha Yi has been excellent early on, and Shy is still a monster. I've liked what the Spark have shown me so far, so I shall be picking them to win in, let's say, a 5-map series. The Hunters are always really weird, so you never know what's going to happen, and I just wouldn't be surprised at all if they ended up winning the game. But genuinely, I do feel that the current meta falls out of their favor, and without RUI there to coach them, I suspect that the adjustment period might take a bit longer than last year. Ending the Thursday games will be Shanghai and Guangzhou. While the Dragons were nowhere close to spectacular last week, 1 week is way too early to lose trust in the defending champs, especially when their opponents are a fairly weak Charge team. The Charge were largely uninspiring last week, and I believe that Shanghai is a poor matchup. The Dragons largely overwhelmed their opponents in most, if not all, areas, so to me that means the Dragons get a convincing sweep. Develop's former teammate Lip is likely to give him a run for his money in the hitscan battle, and even Choi could have a rough time if he goes up against a resurgent Who Are You in the Genji battle. And I mean, the Shanghai support line, it's way more explosive. The Dragons are a better team. End of story. North America doesn't have anything going on Thursday, so we're sticking with APAC at the start of Friday morning. Let's talk Philly versus Chengdu. This is a matchup I like Philly in. They're around just as good with the Zarya comps as Chengdu, and they have a really strong DPS trio that could end up overwhelming Leave. If they struggled dealing with the stuff that Seoul utilized, then Fusion are kind of in good shape since they run a lot of the same things. Yeah, maybe the Hunters do better if Leaf starts to play some Tracer and they do some other things, but then you're going to be depending on Jinmu a lot to still play Echo or maybe even hit scan at times, which hurts their playmaking potential for sure. More of the Fusion DPS are consistently in their element here. They have a rotation that allows for them to play just about anything very comfortably. The Hunters can't run their typical stuff that confused the hell out of people last year, and without more reliable playmakers lining up next to Leave, it's tough for me to trust in their current state. The Fusion are going to take this in a 3-1. Philly have the better mindset, flexibility, and general confidence. They've got this. And now we can get into Seoul versus Guangzhou, and I hold this matchup in a very similar light to Guangzhou versus Shanghai. Again, the Charge are coming off an underwhelming week, and they're playing a team who just looks better than them, and I mean it in every sense, whether it be playstyle, star power, etc. Even through some struggles, the Dynasty were a lot more decisive with their dives, and I thought they looked better and better as the week went on. The Charge dive comps aren't nearly as well executed, and I think that Smurf absolutely rolls Rio in a monkey duel. I also kind of feel like the Charge are stuck into running very specific things. They play a ton of Genji and even Sombra at times when there might be a better pick to make. While their DPS are clearly flexible, it seems that there's some sort of problem going on. Maybe they have to play those heroes for synergy purposes. I don't really know. They're confusing. You gotta go with the Dynasty here in 4. The Charge get a random pity map just because Seoul themselves might do something questionable to give the Charge a chance, but I suspect that the Dynasty will remain in control. Ending this epic streak of APAC matches is the Valiant and Dragons. The LA Valiant were way more competitive than I ever could have dreamed in opening week. Dia and Becky looked relatively solid, and the team did a good job of playing around Sasha and Zarya. This type of meta is clearly one that the Valiant feel pretty comfortable in. Their DPS can show a lot of different looks, leading to their opponents often struggling to keep them down. It's clear that a roster overhaul and Noah Hill's coaching are definitely making a difference. This franchise is hungry for a win, and because they have zero expectations, all the pressure is on their opponents in this case. The Valiant are low-key scary for those teams with greater ambitions. Look at how close they got against the Dynasty, and the Spark for that matter. The early season confusion is working to their advantage. However, this is unlikely to be an upset, and I say that for one simple reason. The Valiant clearly are not the greatest at executing in the clutch in their current state. In both Map 5 losses last week, they went up 2-1 in the series on their opponents, then failed to adapt and keep them down. They were especially abysmal during the Map 5s, as both instances were complete and utter blowouts. And keep in mind, they're playing the defending champs this time, a team that's very accustomed to pulling off comeback wins and playing great Overwatch down the stretch. I fully expect the Dragons to come out alive in a 3-1 effort, let's say. I can't depend on the Valiant to show up in the clutch. Not yet. Especially when facing a team that is literally known for showing up big. Anyway, it's time for some NA action finally. LA versus London is going to come up first, and I feel pretty concerned for the Gladiators. I won't lie to you folks. To choke and get reverse swept for a second straight game is straight up depressing. And it doesn't help that it came against arguably their two biggest rivals / competition in North America. The Glads need to regain their bearings, and luckily for them, London is the perfect team to do so against. The Spitfire have shown some relatively competitive results here and there, but their track record against the higher level rosters is still uninspiring. If there was ever a time to get back into the groove, now would be it if you're the Glads. It's tough to envision an upset when London haven't given us a reason to think it's possible. So, my pick is a 3-0 in favor of the Gladiators. I fear for London in this matchup, as their support line gets demolished big time in the playmaking department. So yeah, while London have the synergy and everything going, they don't have the star power, like I said with the Houston series, to hang in there with the best. Next, we've got the NYXL taking on the Toronto Defiant, and sadly, it's still hard to put faith in New York. Their 3-0 loss to Florida showed they still have much to learn. The big problem with New York is they still aren't playing as a team enough. It's too much about the individual heroics. No matter what the NYXL choose to play, it's an honest struggle. Whether it be Kellen going in by himself or Gundam Jin struggling to keep up on Lucio, they're constantly falling behind over and over, and they're playing a solid Defiant roster. The Defiant just do a way better job of protecting and helping their tanks. And those tanks can attack New York with their flexibility to gain an even larger lead. There's also the big factor at support, of course. Toronto's backline has been excellent, and New York are struggling quite a bit here. I'm sorry to say it, NYXL fans, but your team has not shown enough meaningful progress yet, so I like the Defiant in a 3-1 score. Until New York starts to seriously improve, they're going to continue to be the underdog, I'm sorry. On the topic of underdog stories, how about we move on to Vancouver versus San Francisco? And I mean, yeah, not much to talk about here. The hottest team in North America is playing arguably the worst one in the league. If this is anything other than a 3-0, the Shock are definitely trolling. The Titans have absolutely no countermeasures or strengths to speak of in this type of matchup. They were like okay when playing the Zarya comps in the Atlanta match, but they stubbornly kept on playing a lot of Winston still. This team is all sorts of confused, and it's clear that they're poorly coached. This could be the biggest speedrun in league history. GG's. Now to continue with the APAC overload, let's talk Spark versus Charge. A classic rivalry once again ensues. The only problem is, the Spark were a lot better in that first week, at least to me. They had ups and downs, but they still did beat Seoul and almost Shanghai. 1 week doesn't tell the whole story, but those are some pretty impressive results. And the Charge only played well against the Valiant. The big difference for me once again comes down to that DPS department. Alpha Yi and Shy felt like true focal points of the game plan, and they carried big time during opening week and have shown a lot of comfort on a variety of looks. It's a bit risky to go against the Spark as they have all of the momentum. Let's call it a 4-map series in their favor. I worry for how Develop in particular does against Shy. He has a lot of tough opponents to play here in APAC. This just feels like a lopsided matchup, and if Shy remains uncontested, you're absolutely screwed. Something I'm maybe a bit more hopeful for is Hunters versus Dragons. Neither team looked fantastic last week, which could signal a decent game. The Dragons are apparently dealing with some latency issues among some other things, while the Hunters are trying to figure out how to get back on track. Things could go horribly wrong for either side, or maybe even both. And I mean, Shanghai also have a history of randomly losing to Chengdu, so who knows? Do I think it's going to happen this time? I lean towards no personally, as I think the Dragons are not a team to stay down for long. If there's anyone in the league who can overcome early struggles, it's them. The Dragons need a good showing from their DPS line. I think that's going to be their win condition here. If they can keep Leave in check and take advantage of compositions Chengdu maybe aren't as good on, they've got this. Shanghai are a tight-knit group. Lip, Who Are You, and Fleta get the job done as the Dragons take this in 4. The Hunters are in a state of uncertainty. It's hard for me to say what I think. The Chengdu zone is a very strange place. I'd love to see them get back on track, but the defending champs may not be the best team to do it against. Your final game on Saturday morning features the Fusion and Valiant. Not much to say about this one, folks. The Valiant might have been competitive last week, but Philly were blowing people out. You've got to ride the hot hand. The Fusion are looking like one of the most well-composed, confident teams in the league. The tank tandem on the side of Philly gives them a notable edge compared to the Valiant, who are mostly stuck on Zarya comps. The Fusion can play what's more map appropriate without seeing a drop-off in performance. The likes of Dia and Becky might have it in them to maybe push the Fusion back, but that's not nearly enough. Maybe it could be a good game if the Valiant supports show up, but I'm not going to count on it. I'm taking the Fusion in a sweep. Just as I said when addressing the Shanghai matchup, the Valiant have shown an inability to be clutch. If it comes down to a map 5, it's tough to see them winning. Oh well, let's move on. Time for some more NA stuff. First up is the Spitfire and the Rain. So far, Atlanta have shown zero problems dealing with lower tier rosters. Despite their ups and downs, this is a situation where you have to feel pretty good about them. In fact, they've even started to show a different look last week, showing that they're ready to adjust as needed. At least from what I can tell, the Winston comps generally seem to do better against London's Rush, so the Rain have a good shot of winning. Gator looks like he hasn't missed a beat since returning, and the Wildcard and Venom could be a good countermeasure to Shaxx on Tracer. And due to the Rain's stronger playmaking in the backline, I like their odds of pulling off a sweep. Combine Atlanta's record against poor teams with London's record against good teams, and yeah, it seems like a pretty easy win for Atlanta. So let's talk Houston versus Paris. Given the state both sides are in, this should be a no-brainer. The Outlaws have been solid so far, and the Paris Eternal have all of 2 map wins to their names. This has all the makings of a lopsided affair. If there's any good news for Paris fans out there, though, they didn't look awful against the Dallas Fuel last week. Some signs of life could be on the horizon. If they manage to counter the Doom comps well, they've got a chance. I mean, they could make this interesting. You've got to keep in mind that at this point, Houston are essentially the only team left who like to play Doom consistently. He's becoming a dying breed. Teams have moved on to mostly Winston and Zarya at this point. If Paris can find the key to countering it, then maybe they do have a chance. If they refine their play, this could suddenly be a difficult game for the Outlaws to win. However, I'm of the belief that Paris just aren't there yet. In my opinion, they will strongly benefit from having a few weeks off. But here in the present, where they keep bashing their heads against the wall, they're kind of screwed. The Outlaws get the easy sweep. It's a matter of confidence, right? If you have doubts, then it brings the whole team down. And that's where Paris stand as a team, at least for the time being. Everybody's down. Ending Saturday, we have the next key match of the week between the Florida Mayhem and the ever-so-confusing Washington Justice. This might be the toughest game of the week to predict. What version of the Justice are we gonna get? When Washington are on, I mean, they're fantastic. If they get figured out early on, though, they crumble. The problem with the Justice so far is they depend greatly on their DPS to get that first pick, right? Decay and Happy are a very dangerous combo, so it's natural to depend on them. They're a good focal point to build your team around. But when they're cold or they fail to get that big pick onto the enemy backline, suddenly the Justice forget how to play Overwatch. Dropping the ball against Boston the way they did has me worried. From the perspective of talent and name recognition, you prefer them over Florida, but the Mayhem are scrappy. They have constantly been punching above their weight class this year, making them a dangerous dark horse. This is not an easy game to judge, and in my opinion, the outcome comes down to how well the Mayhem can protect Sir Majed. A big problem Florida have faced so far is dealing with aggressive attacks at their backline. As great as Majed has been, his death rate is through the roof, and when he goes down, the ship tends to sink with him. Look at the results from the Houston and Atlanta games, aka their losses. Majed was getting left out for dead all the time, and that could be a problem in this particular matchup, seeing as that bloodthirsty dive of Decay and Mag could be all over him, putting the Mayhem on the back foot in critical scenarios. Florida have to take a page out of Boston's book, I feel. Play it a bit slower and don't compromise your positioning. Pay close attention and stay together. Both teams have a very specific win condition to meet, and it revolves around that Mayhem backline. This should be a good one. The Justice have the fiery explosiveness, but the Mayhem have the consistency. So really, your pick depends on how much you're willing to gamble here. The safer bet is clearly the Mayhem, but the Justice have the higher potential peak. As for me, I'm playing it safe with a 3-2 Mayhem pick. The Justice have been all over the place this year, and I'd like to see them maybe establish a bit more rhythm and consistency before I start to put my full trust in them. The Mayhem have always looked good this year, win or loss, and I believe in them to keep Majed safe and get a huge W heading into this tournament. Now we head back over to APAC for a showdown between the Dragons and Dynasty, and this is going to be key match number 3. These were two of the highest rated teams coming into the 2022 season, and I'm curious to see how they stack up here in the present. I couldn't be more excited to see the DPS duel, as there's so much going on, you know. Fitz and Prophet versus Fled and Lip is a classic, but it would also be awesome if we got to see Prophet and Who Are You play each other on Genji, as it would remind us all of the good old Apex days. No lie, I could see this being a very good game. Neither team blew me away on Zarya comps, but also looked impressive when pivoting to Winston. If Seoul can force Shanghai to play more of that Winston dive stuff, they have a real chance, as Prophet and Smurf, they'll be in their element, which could make this a very winnable game. And after a pretty impressive showcase from Vindime over the week, there's reason to have high hopes for that support line to maybe keep up. On paper, in the current meta, I believe this is a good matchup. But that's exactly why, as dumb as it may sound, I'm predicting this to not be as close as it should be. If APAC taught me anything last week, it's that nothing is going to go the way I think it should, at least for now. Despite my praise for the Dynasty, I will be rolling with the Dragons in a 4-map series, because after all, with all the chaos that has gone on so far this month, nothing makes more sense than not making any sense at all. What could possibly be more fitting than watching the Dynasty beat Philly or maybe Shanghai and then lose to the other just to make the hierarchy make absolutely no sense? In all seriousness, I believe the Dragons are still the better team. I have a ton of confidence in Izayaki to outplay Creative in the Ana duel and for the team to look better on Zarya compositions. Smurf wasn't terrible in this role or anything, I just prefer an experienced vet like Void. Zarya's been one of his specialties since Apex, and in a world where APAC is heavily embracing facing Zarya, that's gonna work in his favor. I'm generally hoping for a good game, but part of me believes the Overwatch gods will not grant my wish. You know what though? The gods tend to play cruel pranks on us. The games that we want to be close usually don't end up being close, but then we have a game like LA versus Chengdu, which will probably be some sort of 5-map banger knowing our luck. Despite the Hunters clearly having the more favorable team, the Valiant demonstrated fight time after time last week. Teams that they shouldn't be close to were being pushed into map 5s, and when a team as chaotic as the Valiant runs into the Chengdu zone, madness is bound to happen in one way or another. The idea of Dia balling out against a team he likely worked very hard to try and join a few years ago sounds like destiny. And with both teams liking the same types of comps, the Valiant have a real chance, as Sashin has a chance to be a lot more impactful so long as the meta continues to revolve around Zarya. And they also love running things like the Soldier and the Reaper and the Echo, so yeah, all their motivation to win a game combined with being comfortable might lead to a much better game than you think. If the Valiant can push the Spark in Dynasty, then why not Chengdu, right? The Hunters aren't exactly in a perfect state. If there was ever a time to pull off an upset, it would be right now. But the thing is, I can't get myself to go through with it. My pick will be a 3-2 in favor of the Hunters. Chengdu have the X factor and leave. If he gets it going, nobody on the Valiant is stopping him. He should be able to do whatever the heck he wants against a meh team like this. The man is overdue for a huge game, so why not this one? It's the perfect opportunity. And again, I refuse to pick the Valiant in a close match until they prove to me they can be clutch. They'll get close, but I think that their first win in over a year will have to wait a little bit longer. Concluding APAC for the week will be the Spark and Fusion, and after what I saw during week 3, this feels like a good matchup on the surface. Both sides like to show multiple looks and generally look comfortable on them. It's honestly crazy the support lines feel around the same, and that there's a lot of star power between all the damage dealers. This might be a coin toss in the works. If a specific player on either side has a breakout game, that seriously might be what decides the outcome. The Spark have a great chance to go 3-0 this week if they can defeat the Fusion, and that's kind of why I think they're gonna fumble the bag this time. Seoul fans will tell you straight up that Changgun-led teams tend to play with your emotions. I couldn't possibly think of a more fitting outcome for Changgun than to be super close to greatness just for it to slip away. I 100% prefer the Fusion from a consistency standpoint thanks to their coaching. I believe in that group to make solid in-game adaptations. And that's saying something because coming into this year, I wasn't even that high on the Fusion coaching. The Spark might match up well talent-wise, but things like coaching and in-game adjustments are a different story. I'm taking the Fusion here. The Spark did a good job of proving me wrong last week, but I'd like to see a few more good performances before I'm ready to put some trust back into a Changgun-led roster. Anyway, how about we finish strong back in NA? We start off with an interesting one between the Dallas Fuel and the Boston Uprising. Obviously, this is one where the outcome feels like it's pretty easy to predict. The Fuel have been a better team by a country mile and are currently a top 2 team in the region for sure. And the Boston Uprising, well, they're still attempting to find their footing. Where this game ends up being interesting, though, is how Boston play after officially moving on from Striker. The moment they stopped utilizing him, they looked a million times better. That win against the Justice was quite impressive. It was almost as if Striker was holding them back. Everybody played so much better. I'm curious to see if that momentum transfers over. Dallas are a tough opponent, but confidence can go a long way. I'm not expecting them to push the Fuel to their limits or anything, seeing as Dallas have a more proactive support line and are even better on Zarya comps, but you never know. Just because of like the clear-cut talent difference, I guess you could say, my pick is a 3-1 in favor of the Dallas Fuel. Maybe Boston can come out swinging and take control or something. Between their confidence and extremely good record on opening maps, maybe they end up giving the Fuel fans a bit of a scare early on. After that, though, I fully expect the Fuel to remain in control and send the Boston Uprising packing. Boston don't really have a lot of advantages to speak of in this game, so yeah, Dallas, I don't really see how they lose this one. And last, but certainly not least, we've got a matchup between the LA Gladiators and Atlanta Reign. This will be key match number 4 of the week. The Glads have generally looked better so far, but as I said with their first match, choking to rivals repeatedly can make you overthink things, leading to a drop-off in performance. And it's not like the Reign are some scrub team. They must be taken seriously, and I very much consider this to be a trap game for the Gladiators. They're trying to move on from a tough couple of weeks, which could lead to underestimating their opponent. I've seen it happen more times than I can count in this league. When you go through so much heartbreak all in a row, one slip-up or lost map is all it takes for things to quickly spiral out of control. The Glads have to keep this from reaching a map 5. I am terrified of what might happen if we get to that point. The good news is that the current meta, in my opinion at least, definitely favors them. The Reign seem to be, finally, moving away from the Doom and starting on the Winston dive trend, and that's a mirror match that the Glads love a lot. They outplayed Dallas on it, for crying out loud, and they looked good against the Shock, at least for the first couple of maps with it. Reiner's ability to lead and make plays on Winston makes me feel a bit better about him than Gator. I'm also not completely sure if the Reign have an answer for Kevster's Tracer. Venom might be a solid prospect, but he's never had to lock horns with a superstar of this caliber before. This might be too much of a risk to trust in. The Gladiators are simply a better Winston dive team. I feel a lot more comfortable going with them as they have the better experience and knowledge running this comp. And I don't know what it is, but I just don't love the Reign in those Winston dive comps. Historically, under Sephi, they haven't looked that great on them. So my pick shall be a 4-map victory for the LA Gladiators. The Glads are in the danger zone, and their opponents match up well talent-wise, but people are quick to forget that LA are still one of the best teams in the league. They definitely weren't looking that great choking those 2 big games, I won't lie to you, but the fact that they can keep up with literally anyone shows you that there is reason to have confidence in this group, and they might come out swinging. I'm worried about them, yes, but they could play very angry at the same time. It could be a bit close for comfort, but the Glads should walk out of this alive as they end up qualifying for the tournament with relative ease. Okay, wow, that was a lot. 20 game predictions later, and we're finally done. This week is going to be pretty hype. We get more APAC action, and by the time we reach Sunday night, we will know exactly who makes the Kickoff Clash tournament. And as of right now, everybody that would make it in if the tournament started today is who I see making it to the bracket, with the exception of Chengdu over in APAC, as I believe they will be eclipsed by the Shanghai Dragons. And yeah, that's going to do it, folks. This week is going to be crazy for more reasons than one. If you're excited for all the action, give this video a like and let me know what your preds are for the week down in the comments below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate your support. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.